Yeah, and just regarding logistics, feel free if at any point you have any questions, there should be a box. You can input your questions in the box, and we'll address them at the end. In terms of, yeah, like I mentioned, the webinar will be recorded, so we'll be able to send that out after. The next thing is I'm a little under the weather, so hence my voice may sound a little off today. Apparently I have the flu, which I didn't realize that I was dealing with the last few days. So I am working at home, and I do have a couple dogs next to me, so you may hear them at a couple points throughout, but don't be alarmed. That's not me, maybe, or maybe me, maybe the dogs. But okay, so let's get started. I presume this will I'm anticipating this will take about 30, 35 minutes. And if you have any questions, we can address those towards the end. Like I mentioned, but let's begin the plan for today. There's kind of three things we're going to cover off. The first is the science of consumer anticipation. We'll discuss a few of the studies from cognitive science, as well as some of social psychology. And then we'll move more into what this means, what are the opportunities to apply anticipation, and then last and probably most important, how do we go about action in this from a marketing standpoint as well as from a market research standpoint. So I always give a little chat for people who don't know who I am or what my background. I have a pretty interesting or distinct background. I feel like everyone does, or coming into some type of market research or insights function. But nonetheless, I used to weigh over 300 pounds. I lost a lot of weight. Here's a picture for those who don't believe me. I got super curious and interested in how and why I did it. I went to school for health. Have a degree in exercise physiology and nutrition. And then I worked in the field, and I worked with a lot of people. And what I've come to realize is that anything to do with health behavior change really had nothing to do with anything I learned or teaching anyone anything, but it was more as a result of social influences, a lot of subconscious decisions that were made, and a lot of different contexts that played a role and shaped ultimately those choices over time. So I got super interested in that, and I moved into the behavioral sciences. I worked for a firm, Catalyst Behavioral Sciences, for several years, went to business school, and which ultimately led me to Beazey, the current organization I work with now, which is I'll speak to in a second. But my life has been strictly focused on just understanding how behavior works and how we can ultimately go about changing it. So Beazey is a behavioral science agency, and the core focus is using behavioral science as a means to drive better commercial outcomes for our clients. And we do that through blending some of the best of behavioral science, marketing strategy, and consumer insights. So we're going to first start with the science of consumer anticipation. But first I want to kind of highlight just start with a definition. Everyone, there's probably many different definitions rolling around of anticipation, but here's one from a paper below. It's a mental process by which consumers consider the physical, experiential, social, emotional, or behavioral consumption outcomes that are experienced to accrue to the self from a yet to be realized consumption decision or experience. So in that kind of lengthy definition is three kind of factors. The first being that it's a psychological process. So this all happens in the mind. Two, there's a lot of different outcomes. So just think of it like there's multiple different paths that could potentially come to fruition. And then the third is this always happens before consumption. So that's the point of the anticipation in the outcome process, is that it happens before a potential decision or experience happens, which ultimately, if you understand this, you can see how we can maybe impact the anticipation and impact the decision or the choice or the behavior. So, this is actually, it's kind of interesting because anticipation is not a new thing. It's just becoming more popular now because of more recent shifts in science. But, this is a pretty famous paper from Jevons back in 1905. And, it was realized early on that, there's three ways pleasure and pain are caused. Anticipation of future events, sensation of present experiences or events, and then also the memory of past events. The interesting thing about this, we tend to only think about experience in present moments, but there's also the anticipation and the memories. Those are both just mental. So there's a lot of sensory elements in the present, touch, hear, sight, sound, taste, etc. But the top one and the bottom one have strictly just to do with mental. Right? Sorry about that. The dogs are heading out. Okay, so this next slide is the best way to think about this anticipation, experience, and memory is it graphed over time. So if we think about how anticipation moves over time, or how an experience happens over time, is we anticipate something, we experience it, and we remember it. And then when you think about total value of something that someone can pull from a particular an entire experience. So let's just say we go on a vacation and I want to know how much value that is to myself. I can look at that, extract value from the anticipation component, the actual experience, and then actually remembering that and recalling those up at later points in time. And that will subjectively create that total net experience value of that actual experience. And so I think the key takeaway from this is when we look at experience, it's not just the experience itself, but it extends further beyond. And there's when we understand this, you'll come to realize that we can start changing the value of the services we offer, the experiences we offer, in making our products and brands much more valuable to our customers. So I'm going to talk about a couple studies, which I think are super critical to highlight the point of the value of focusing on anticipation. But, one of them comes from social psychology from Roy Baumeister. This is a pretty recent study, which it was a experience sampling study where they had people record their thoughts at various points in time throughout the day. I don't remember the sample size, but I believe it was pretty high, a few thousand people. And what they found was amongst the sample that most people spend the majority of their time thinking about the future in regards to the past. So, obviously most people are going to be present focused, so dealing with the here and now. But beyond that, the most significant finding was that most people spend time thinking about the future. And this is pretty critical and substantial because a lot of people focus on the past in marketing or market research, but most of our consumers are in the forward, thinking about the future, and for rightful reasons. It's changeable. There's options. There's a lot of flexibility with the future and possibility. So the mind's always moving forward. Okay, the next finding comes from some of the Nobel Prize winning research and from the cognitive and neurosciences. And, I think this is absolutely fascinating, but it really comes down to, when they do brain research, they always put caps on people, they measure neuroactivity, and they give them tasks, and they measure electrical activity in the brain. And what they find is the brain consumes about 25% of the energy when they're doing any of these tasks. The interesting thing was when they measured at rest, and I think they did this by accident at first, is they realized that the brain only consumes 5% less energy. And this is pretty amazing, because, if any other part of the body, say for instance, your muscle, if you use it, it's going to considerably change the energy consumption. But when it comes to the brain, it's actually not consuming more when you probe it with a task. And what the big finding or big takeaway from what was that, that the brain is always on. And, this ended up winning Nobel Prize, or a Cavalli Prize, I think it's called, in neuroscience, for the discovery of what they call the default mode network. In other words, and this just means that the brain's always on. So how this relates to anticipation is the brain is always on, it's always thinking, it's always anticipating, it's always projecting future possibilities. So that's the end of the science section. But I love the science. It's really fascinating. But the next question is, so what? So what's this mean for people, for marketers, market researchers? I think the interesting thing is, coming back to our graph here, is people derive value from anticipation. So just like we said, pleasure and pain is not just in the experience, but it's actually in the anticipation and the memories. A lot of companies may have tried to create memories, but, what about creating anticipation? So anticipation is translated into savoring. It's positive anticipation for future events. And the other thing that's also interesting is a lot of things consumers do are not positive. In that case, they're dreadful. So in the case of savoring, think of anything that people like doing, going to Disney World, going on vacation, buying some clothes, whatever it may be. There's a lot of anticipation value before that actual experience of wearing it, buying it, going there, that can be tapped if we understand how to do it correctly. And then on the bottom side, there's also negative utility from contemplation so it's the one minus of anticipation, that's dread. Okay. And, you can think of that. I'm going to give an example of Gillette in a second, but like going to the dentist, going to the lawyer, or jury duty, or, I did some research with Gillette, and people, it's funny because when I first started working with Gillette, this was many years ago, but everyone wants to try to make the experience better. And, I think it took a little while, but we had to come to ask, what if people don't want an experience? What if they don't want a better experience? If you think about it, Gillette, where any type of like shaving your face, you don't get any value. It's not rewarding to buy a razor. It's not rewarding to shave with a razor, and nor do you get the feedback or satisfaction of, someone telling you after seeing you shave. I've yet for someone to come up to me after I shaved and say, wow, your face looks really good and nice and shaved now. So there's generally no positive value in the entire experience. So therefore, certain cases you may want to remove the anticipation, to having to think about buying, using, experiencing something, and that it can sometimes increase the total value by removing that that dread, that negative experience. And that's not across everything, but there'll be certain instances where that happens. Okay, next I want to kind of introduce a concept of how this plays together in a concept I've come to call triple jeopardy. So, the first is single jeopardy is all. Some of you guys actually may have heard of the double jeopardy concept with Aaron Berg-Bass and How Brands Grow. In other words, which states if you focus on household penetration, you'll get loyalty benefits. In other words, the bigger your brand is, you'll reap the benefits of having more loyalty without having to focus on loyalty. So the concept kind of is very similar to that in the sense that single jeopardy, by increasing consumer anticipation, you subsequently increase consumer experience value, which in turn will increase consumer memories. So they kind of work really well together, okay? So increasing anticipation, you start thinking about the purchase, the activity, then it becomes more valuable to you. Then you start liking the experience more. And then third, you have more memories of the experience. So you can kind of see how they work together there. So I somewhat put together this double jeopardy brand building matrix. So this kind of works like, acquisition leads to the double jeopardy is loyalty. So by focus on acquiring, you get the benefits of loyalty. By focusing on anticipation, you get the benefits of experience, better experiences and memories as a result. So let's take a look at consumer anticipation as it relates to the journey, to kind of get an idea of where it plays out, how it actually manifests. So, what we have here is problem recognition, information search, evaluation of alternatives, purchase decision, consumption evaluation. So you can kind of see that consumer anticipation, it can play out in all of these stages. But the main area where it kind of arises is in between the purchase decision and the consumption. That's where it'll be at its height. So if you think about, and actually we're going to give a few examples in a second, but it's that delay period between the purchase decision and the consumption. But there'll be definitely instances where consumer anticipation will arise earlier on, such as when you recognize a problem, or maybe you're searching for a computer that you're interested in. So there's all different ways it can arise, but the main core area is between the purchase decision and the consumption. And we'll bring it to more concreteness right here. So, when it comes to buying chocolate, you may recognize early on, and you might have an impulse, and you can see it, the anticipation will start early on. Then you go to the store, and then you start looking at the different ones, and then you may make a purchase decision. But the anticipation can happen earlier in the stage, although it may not be long time period. But all right, let's look at the second example, ordering lip gloss, on Amazon. So the main part of where anticipation would arise here would be, more at that purchase decision. And there's a huge opportunity from that purchase decision to that consumption where you can really enhance that anticipation. We're going to go through some of those examples later, but it's, once that purchase decision made, there's that window between the product shipped and actually received and used when anticipation is at its height. And then last is booking a hotel. This usually has a very large time period between the purchase decision and consumption, creating an even bigger window of anticipation. Or so there's a lot of room for opportunity to play with that, and we'll discuss more on how to optimize that window. So this last bucket here is actioning and anticipation, and we're going to talk about action anticipation from marketing side as well as from market research. Excuse me. So we're going to just give some examples on how to action it from a marketing standpoint. And then we'll show how we can test it. Well, we're going to look at how we action it from marketing side through experience design, through innovations, as well as how to use it in communications. So when it comes to designing experience, this comes automatic first when it comes to making using anticipation. But when it comes to wait times, wait times seem to have a negative stigma. Like, people think nobody likes waiting, and to some extent that's true. However, there's also other ways to look at using wait times to build anticipation. The analogy I always give is imagine you're waiting at a steak dinner, or imagine you're at a steak dinner, you place an order, really high-end steakhouse, order your prime filet mignon, whatever, and then 2 minutes later it comes out. You're going to be a little worried. So the point is, the right amount of wait time can actually be helpful for a consumer. So learning how to, obviously at some point you don't want to, too much wait time is just not good, but the right amount of wait time can make the perceived value of the experience, the product, really help. So that's first. Here's just some ideas, or in terms of how different brands or companies use different tools to enhance that anticipation. When it comes to Disney, who is generally thought of as the king of experiences, they send this magic band out in advance, well in advance, and that's the anticipation's beginning, and they leverage this very well from that time. The next is waiting in line. This can go for many different things. People wait in line for Apple, to get the new iPhone. I'm sure there's many other things. People wait in line for shoe releases, or whatever it may be. But using these as these can be ways to increase the value of your product. So, this last one here is seamless. The last one is, you're creating demand by showing those lines. People clearly like waiting in long lines for things. It kind of adds to the thrill of the experience. So, by not doing that would kind of diminish that experience. So there's cases where, you may want lines. Certainly at restaurants, that's another thing. Even if there's an empty restaurant, people prefer the ones that are busy and packed because it signals quality, status, better food or something. I don't know. Subconsciously, it conveys something to the customer. And this last one is example of food delivery. As things move to technology and online, this becomes super interesting way to really build anticipation. Whenever you order something, when this thing is telling me my food's being prepared, it's on its way, it shows where it is. This actually gets super interesting. Next is building anticipations into innovations. So, people may question, how does anticipation get built into, consumer packaged goods? Or, we're not no Disney, we're not no service experience, we're not technology. There's plenty of little nuanced ways. for instance, when it comes to making spaghetti, just simple, subtle things like this, arouses our interest and curiosity. It provides that like teasing effect by seeing what's inside the box, and we'll show this later with a testing application. But also, with Apple, we got a little bit more to show you. So kind of building the hype, leaving some unanswered questions, some uncertainty. So when it comes to product launches, Tesla, did some pretty good stuff around building anticipation. They got so many people to sign up, I don't know if it was sign up or pre-buy the new Tesla without even seeing what it looked like. Clearly, he aroused and built so much anticipation that people end up wanting to put up money without even knowing what a car looked like. This last part is about communications. I think there's a big opportunity to leverage anticipation and communication. It's just a way to engage people more, and open up the mind. Our mind's stimulated in interesting ways. One of them being curiosity, information gaps. You can see here an Altoids ad. People wonder why this lady has Altoids in her kind of her bra pocket there, and you can see it's just pretty funny. There's dentures and brass knuckles. So I'm not saying this ad worked or not, but using different devices that get our mind to wonder, to get curious, and ultimately be engaged in the piece more, whatever it is, can be helpful for the brand. Here's another one. I guess it's the male version. Creating some information gaps, wondering what's in there, and this may be a pretty good ad for Altoids. Just highlight a couple other ways anticipation can roll out in communication. Just simple leaving it open. It's coming. It leaves you wondering. You're like, oh, what's so? And then also on the visual side, when it comes to images, when we see visuals that are in movement, our mind's always guessing where it's going. So that drop of the honey, our mind likes seeing those things because it conveys movement, and our mind's anticipating what's going to happen to that. When it comes to shipping stuff, I know a lot of companies are getting into delivery and online, and this is a pretty substantial opportunity. And the example here is with Trunk Club sending boxes. Just unboxing things is in and of itself something that heightens anticipation. Just think about opening any type of gifts, whether Christmas, birthday, etc., or packages, regardless of how simple or small they are. People enjoy it, and so anticipating what's in it. Creating uncertainty by mixing what's in it. So leaving some variables of uncertainty. In other words, not if the consumer doesn't know fully what's going to be in there, can generate some of that as well. And then, here's just a little touch on top. We can't wait for you to see what's inside. Okay, great. So this last segment is just about measuring anticipation. We're going to cover off three things: cognitive expectations, anticipated emotions, and brand experiences. So the first one is cognitive expectations. Taking that, just want to kind of give you an idea of how this can roll out in your market research. Now, these don't have to be complete on their own things they could maybe added to your current research. But these are just three different ideas. The first is about, we have the Thin Spaghetti packages. So we randomized these to different participants. We had 3 different conditions. The first had no see-through on the package, and then the other 2 had transparent film, so you could see the spaghetti inside. Just different window shapes, just to kind of see if that affected anticipation anymore. So, a lot of times people buy foods and they haven't had them, and, a lot of purchase or a lot of taste is based on expectation. It's based on the expectation of what you see. Clearly, we can't sense many other things when we're in the grocery store, so we have to rely on our expectations of what this tastes like. So, by using different packages, randomizing them to people, and then we assessing how tasty is this, how healthy is this pasta. Mind you, these are just these are self-report scales, 0 to 7. It's not rocket science, but you could just see differences with how people respond to taste expectations based on the different packages. So there's not considerable differences with the film, with the see-through film on the 2 on the right, but there is a significant difference between the closed package that has no window and the ones that have window. That at least leads us to the conclusion that, we want to put a window on there. It actually helps consumers perceive that this product is tastier, and actually this green bar actually indicates the rating of healthfulness. So, which makes sense. When you see through it, it gives you that perception of healthy. Okay. Yeah. So this first one is kind of very self-report survey. There's another one that we use quite often. This one's called progressive expectation maximization testing. And this one's a little more dealing with implicit associations for those who deal with a lot of implicit testing, or the behavioral sciences may be familiar with doing implicit testing. But, so what we do is do more rapid testing, implicit associations. So we show different stimuli for instance, the shape of the Listerine bottle in the middle there, as well as the Scope bottle, and this is just their silhouette. So it's just people are responding to shapes and judging or associating them with either the word powerful or gentle, and what obviously based on some of the characteristics of the shape of the package, people will associate things with words more than others. So it can become very clear that Listerine is generally associated with more powerful, and they use different package cues that help elicit that. The Listerine bottle looks like a dumbbell almost. It has rough, hard edges, hard in the sense of angles, and then Scope, which is the bottom image, that silhouette is generally more gentle on the mouth, and it kind of exudes that through its packaging by having rounded curves. And we'll test this implicitly, multiple trials, switching around the words, and allow people to associate different words with different package shapes. And then also we'll do this with, even down to the labels and the fonts. to find the right curves and see, people associate different shapes and different colors. And we want to make sure that these align with consumers' expectations. So the more we can map what we want to convey to the consumer and align the expectations, the more likely that product's going to be a success. And, there's no reason to stop at just the shape of the package or the font or the label. There's so many things that you can test with this. It could be features and benefits. It could be logos, the shapes of the logo. Should GE be placed in a box? Should it be placed in a circle, an oval? Usage occasions. These are other things. Understanding expectations with these can really enhance and unlock a product's potential. Okay, the next part is anticipated emotions. I think this is super interesting and insightful for the fact that most people think emotions are about here and now. In other words, we feel things in the present moment. And, there's kind of two camps in research, some and arguing and getting in theoretical debates about what is more important. We're not going to do that today. We're just going to acknowledge the fact that there's these things called immediate emotions, things that how I feel, and then there's things, anticipated emotions, which are how I expect to feel. As it relates to this presentation, we're going to say that anticipated emotions are more important because they guide behavior. So we're not going to do something based on, we may do something based on how we feel, but also we do things based on how we expect to feel. I'm not going to touch the stove because I expect that won't feel too well, but I might go for a run because I know I may not feel good, but I expect to feel really good after because I know that's generally the feeling. So looking at this, there's a lot of ways that this can be interwoven into market research. And we're going to give an example of communication. The first is same thing. We have 3 different Coke ads here. We want to know which communications drive the strongest positive feelings. Okay, so Coke makes me feel good. These are 7-point rating scales again. Coke makes me feel good. Drinking a Coke would make me feel good. It seems very subtle language, but it's super critical, the difference between the two. Feel good versus a Coke would make me feel good. So you can see the difference, immediate versus anticipated. And when we look at this, there's not a substantial difference between immediate and anticipated on the for each of these, but you can notice the differences between them, just enough where it might impact our decisions on these. Ideally, we would want high positive, immediate emotions as well as anticipated, but some cases it may not bring a very high anticipated emotion based on the temporal order, or based on what's communicated in the ad. So you can see the one on the left here, it's kind of more focused on the brand, where the other 2 are more focused on a more intricate part of opening up a Coke beverage. So it kind of changes the way the mind works about thinking about opening something up. It generates stronger anticipated emotion with that. So another area I think that can be applied to measure anticipated emotion, which it's a very interesting methodology, is measuring different types of emotions. Some of you guys may be familiar with these emotions. We can look at them on two dimensions here, negative and positive, negative on our left, positive on our right. But what's interesting about these emotions is they're also temporal. So the top, regret and nostalgia are the past, boredom and joy is the present, and then dread and hope is the future. One thing that can be done with this is we can look at linguistic analysis and not just analyze whether content's negative or positive, but look at whether there's the past, present, and future within the emotions. And then we could start understanding consumers a little bit more and how they're thinking about a product or a brand or an experience and how to optimize that. It's, because there's definitely ways in which you want to use anticipation. As we discussed, you could use anticipation to move people into a brand or to buy a brand. The same thing, if we get information that consumers are not thinking about it in the right way, we can go about actively changing that. This last part is build brand experiences by tapping into anticipation value. So as we mentioned early on, there's three types of value, not just value from experiencing or consuming something, but there's also value created on the end from thinking about buying something, maybe adding it to your shopping cart, maybe, whatever it is, putting a down payment. There's things when, even just a moment you start thinking about wanting to buy something, that can add anticipation value. So I have some questions listed out here to help people think through how to build additional value in these domains. So in anticipation, at what point does the anticipation value begin? Or is there a way to extend it out further? What key features or benefits do they look forward to within the experience? How far out does it begin? How can we increase pre-experience sharing? If you get people to share about their experience, sometimes they can heighten that even more, that anticipation, that they committed to it, that they're doing it, that they're buying it, that they're using it. How can we apply anticipation to accelerate purchase frequency? Okay, in the consumption value, everyone focuses on this, so not really going to pay much attention here. The only thing I think that's interesting or novel is, what senses do customers attune to in the experience? We tend to only mainly think about visual because it dominates our sensory. But there's so many others like taste, touch, smell, and hearing that are rarely engaged like visual sight. So how can we tap into those to build value? And then memories, looking at how we can derive value from memories. Can we send some reminders, photos from the experience, whatever it may be. This is definitely a way to capture maybe some loyalty, or even sharing word of mouth. So, like I said, three experiences, or three parts. When we think about a total experience, think about it in three parts: anticipation, consumption, and remembered value. All right, so we're going to wrap up here. Three key takeaways. Anticipation is valuable. It's definitely something not everyone's using. It's definitely a powerful tool based on understanding the mind. And when you know how to use it, or when you do use it, you can definitely enable brand growth and, changing behavior and ultimately creating competitive advantages. Apply anticipation to marketing interventions. We left with a lot of different things to thought starters as how some different brands and companies are, just driving curiosity, engaging future emotions, and how they're measuring it. We ultimately want to be able to tap into this asset that consumers are using to make decisions and use it to our advantage. So the more our brands can build this into innovations, our service experiences, our service encounters, whatever it may be, our communication, the more likely we can help customers choose our brands. And then, add this to your toolkit, your measurement toolkit. There's just simple little things that can be added to your surveys or measurement programs, just to understand a little bit more about how people are thinking about the future perceptions of things, or their expectations, or where their emotions are, or different parts of brand experience from an anticipatory perspective. So, well, thank you guys. Wrapping it up. And let me see if there's any questions here. Okay, so it looks like there's no questions, but want to thank you guys for those of you who attended. Emails up there, websites up there. Appreciate it, guys, for listening in. Thanks again.